This week's Parsha is Parshas Naso, begins on page 749. The Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, take a census of the sons of Gershon as well, according to their father's household, according to their families. That last week's Parsha, Parshas Bamidbar, ended, that was 2 weeks ago, but the previous Parsha ended with the census of it was talking about the census of the Levite families and their assigned work. So it ended with the census of the family of Kahas, which was the most important family of the Levim. That's where Moshe and Aaron came from. And they were the ones who carried the holy vessels of the tabernacle, including the Ark of the Covenant. So they were mentioned first. Now we're talking about the next two families, the family of Gershon, who was the eldest of the three sons of Levi, and the family of Merari. And it begins with the census of the family of Gershon, and says in verse 24, this is the work of the Gershonite families, to work and to carry. They shall carry the curtains of the tabernacle and the tent of meeting, its cover and the tachash cover that is over it from above, and the screen of the entrance of the tent of meeting, and the lace hangings of the courtyard and the screens, etc. So they would carry, the family of Gershon, when they were moving the tabernacle, so they would carry all the tapestries, the fabrics for the most part, and since it was portable, there were a lot of fabrics involved. The ceiling and roof of the structure of the tabernacle, the Holy and the Holy of Holies, were fabric, they were tapestries. And the dividing walls and the door and the really containing wall, the wall around the courtyard, were also made from pillars with tapestries attached to them. So this was all carried by the family of Gershon. And then in verse 29, we have Merari's responsibilities. The sons of Merari, according to their families, according to their father's household, shall you count them. From 30 years of age and up until 50 years of age shall you count them, everyone who comes into the legion to perform the work of the tent of meeting. And what's their work? This is the charge of their burden for all their work in the tent of meeting. The planks of the tabernacle, its bars, its pillars, and sockets. So the building of the tabernacle, the Holy and the Holy of Holies, were made out of vertical wooden planks that had a base of, each one had a base of 2 silver sockets, and they were joined together with squared off rings. And the pillars of the courtyard all around in their sockets, their pegs, their ropes for all the utensils, for all their work. So the family of Merari were mostly doing the heavy lifting, that they were carrying, whereas the family of Kahas were carrying the holy vessels. The family of Gershon, were carrying the tapestries, and and Merari were carrying the building materials. They were carrying the wood, the metal. And then it says, you shall appoint them by name to the utensils they are to carry on their watch. And our sages say you are to appoint them by name, meaning that each person has a specific assignment that he's assigned in the work, and he's not allowed to exchange with somebody. You can't, let's say, pay someone who has an easier job, pay him off, and you do that job, and I'll do your job. And that they weren't allowed to do that. Whatever work they were assigned, it was their mitzvah to do that work, and they weren't allowed to exchange that with anyone else. And I say that this is true about all of the work of the Levim, but it was said by Merari because they had the heavy lifting, so you would think they would be more anxious to exchange. Okay, and it concludes, this is the work of the family of Merari, the families of the sons of Merari on page 751, according to all their work in the tent of meeting, under the authority of Isamar, son of Aaron the Kohen. Okay, and then he counted the Kahasites for 30 years of age until, and then it says what the counting was. This is where we had a previous count in Parshas Bamidbar from 2 weeks ago, the previous Parsha. So that was accounting from the 30 days and older. So 30 days old and older. And that was to see how many Levim they had. Here it was to see how many Levim did they have who are now currently ready to work. And that was from 30 years of age and up. And so it was a different count. So it gives the count for the family of Kahas was 2,750. And the counting of Gershon in verse 40 were 2,630. And then the counting of Merari were 3,200. Okay. And then it totals them in verse 46. All those counted as the Levites who Moshe and Aaron and the leaders of Israel counted according to their families, according to their father's household, from 30 years of age and up until 50 years of age. Everyone who comes to perform the work of the service and the work of the burden in the tent of meeting, their countings were 8,580. So out of the 22,000 male Leviim from 30 days of age and older, so there were 8,580 who were between 30 and 50 who would be actually doing the work of the bearing the burdens.
Took that many people to carry it? To carry all the things?
I guess so. I mean, they're carrying a building, basically. Yeah. And not just the building, but also the retaining wall around the courtyard. And so, yeah, there was a lot of stuff to carry. Okay, so now on the bottom of page 751, chapter 5, Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, command the children of Israel that they shall expel from the camp and everyone with saras, everyone that's the spiritual skin disease, everyone who has had a zav emission, and everyone contaminated by a human corpse. That's someone who has an emission from their body that's not normal. It's not caused by any physical arousal. And everyone contaminated by a human corpse. Male and female alike you shall expel. To the outside of the camp shall expel them, so they shall not contaminate the camp among which I dwell. The children of Israel did so. They expelled them to the outside of the camp, as Hashem had spoken to Moshe. So did the children of Israel do. So our sages say that there are three categories of impurity that's mentioned here, and it really just gives three, but each one includes anything similar to it. So it gives anyone with saras, with the spiritual leprosy, it's its own category. Then everyone who has a zav emission, included in that is anyone who becomes impure through an emission from their body. So it could be a zav, it could be a woman who's impure through menstruation or through a female version of this zav, a woman who has an unusual emission from her body that's in a time that's not expected. And that's anyone who becomes impure through an emission from their body. And then the third category is everyone contaminated by human corpse. That includes all other categories of impurity. So let's say someone who was touched by a dead rodent, which would make them impure, that would be included also with the impure through the dead body. And there are three zones of camp that they're expelled from. And the most serious one, that's the Mitzorah, the one with the spiritual skin disease. So he's expelled from all three camps: the camp of the Israelites, the camp of the Levites, and it's called the Machne Shechina, the camp of the divine presence. And they would be expelled outside all the campment of all the Degalim, all the formations, all the sections for the tribes. And the middle level, which was the level of those who were impure through this emission from an emission from their bodies, they're expelled from the camp of the Leviim, of the Levites. The Meshech Chochmah comments that you can't say that they're expelled from the camp where the general populace of the Leviim lived, because this is something that women would become ritually impure from an emission from their bodies regularly. That when they menstruate, they would be impure according by Torah law, they would be impure for a week. So how could it be that once a month the wife is and whatever, a woman in the house are leaving the house for a week? And the Meshech Chochmah understands that there's actually two zones within the camp of the Levites. One is the camp of the general populace, and then there's the area immediately surrounding the tabernacle. And that area, that's what we refer to when we say that they're expelled from the camp of the Levites. Okay, and then there's the ones who are impure through contact with the dead or any other category of impurity that comes from external sources, and they're just expelled from the Mishkan, from the tabernacle itself. And this is when we're encamped in the desert. What about when we are in the land of Israel? We have the Beis Hamikdash, we have the Holy Temple. So what are the zones there? So our sages say that the Mitzorah, the one with the physical, the spiritual skin disease, so he would be expelled from the entire city of Yerushalayim, entire city of Jerusalem. And that would be the equivalent of the Israelite camp. The equivalent, and then the equivalent of the Levite camp would be the Temple Mount. So someone who is impure through one of these emissions from their body, so they would be off. The whole Temple Mount would be off limits to them. And somebody who was impure through contact with the dead or any of these other external sources of ritual impurity, they would be not allowed in a section of the Beis Hamikdash of the temple that's within it's called the Israelite courtyard and inward. So that's not there's the main courtyard, which is where the altar was, and then you had the structure of the Holy and the Holy of Holies inside there, and that's more off limits. But even outward from there, you have another section called the Israelite courtyard, and that would be off limits to these people too. So anyone who's impure in any way would be banned from that area. And this makes a big difference nowadays, because even nowadays the sanctity of the Temple Mount is still there. And that's why you hear that when people go to visit the Temple Mount, that many rabbis discourage it. And that's because somebody who's ritually impure from, let's say, from emission from their bodies, they couldn't go on the entire Temple Mount. So if any of us wanted to go, we'd have to go in a mikveh before to ensure that we weren't impure from that fashion. And there might even be more ramifications than that, but mostly going to the mikveh would be enough to take care of most cases. It might need to be a spring, depending on if the person's really a zav, but that's unlikely, probably. But we need to go into the mikveh first. And we'd have to know also where exactly the area is that someone who's impure from contact with the dead would be banned from, because just about all of us have come in contact with the dead at one time or another. We've been inside a cemetery, or we've been in a funeral home where there was a dead body there, and that would cause it. We would already be ritually impure, and we couldn't purify ourselves because you need the ashes of the red cow for that. And for this reason, many rabbis discourage people from going on the Temple Mount, and because first of all, they need to be pure on a certain level to go on any part of the Temple Mount, and they need to be pure in a way that we really can't get nowadays to go into a certain area. Yeah, they might think that they're praying, which but I'm saying not for practical reasons, just for halachic reasons, that rabbis will.
Does the same thing apply to the Western?
No, so the Western Wall is actually the retaining wall of the Temple Mount. So the Western Wall is a part of the wall that surrounded the entire Temple Mount. So when you're by the Western Wall, you're actually outside the Temple Mount. So that would be okay.
Over the wall. That's where the Muslims say.
Right. So that's the area that we can't go to. Right. And it's okay. I'll leave it at that. Okay. So if anybody's thinking about going there, I'd advise them to talk to a competent halachic expert first. Okay. So let's continue. I recommend Rabbi Slates. So let's continue.
He allowed us to go to the wall.
Yeah.
And go down to the tunnel tour.
Right, and that would be
We looked at that walk and said,
okay.
Don't you try it.
Okay, good.
Long walk, real long walk, and it's not very safe.
Oh, that's what he was saying. He was saying safety wise, and that's also good. Those are important things to take into consideration. I'm just saying from the perspective of halacha, it's also a question. Okay, so now it continues in verse 5 on page 753. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, man or woman who commits any of man's sins by committing treachery towards Hashem, and that person shall become guilty." This is referring to if a person robs another person and and is brought to court and swears a false oath. He's adjured with an oath by the court that he swears falsely, and then later he confesses his sin. He confesses, I did steal it, I swore falsely. He wants to repent. So in verse 7, they shall confess their sin that they committed. He shall make restitution for his guilt in its principal amount. He has to pay back the value of what he stole, and add its fifth to it, and add a 1/5 surcharge, and give it to the one to whom he is indebted. So we've seen earlier in Parshas Mishpatim, and that if someone, a burglar, let's say, he pays double for what he stole. A burglar, let's say, sneaks into someone's garage, steals a bike, so the Torah says he would have to pay double. That's a burglar, but a robber, meaning strong arm robbery, actually does not pay double. They pay principal plus a 1/5 surcharge. Right. One of the reasons why our sages say it's that, and they're worse in different ways. But if someone's sneaking in and hiding themselves, they're burgling. They're making a statement that they're afraid of people. They're going in the middle of the night. They're afraid of people, but they're not afraid of God. Whereas a strong-armed robber, at least he's saying he's not afraid of anybody. Yeah. Meaning he's not putting people above his fear of people above the fear of God. So his sin is a little less in a sense. So he doesn't pay double. He pays an extra 1/5. And as we said there, as we said in Parshas he'd also have to bring an offering as well. If the man has no kinsman to whom the debt can be returned, let's say someone robs a person who has no heirs. That's heirs with an H. So how does that happen? And according to Torah law, if a person doesn't have any sons, they're with their wife, their brothers, or we go back a generation to their brother's sons, or their uncle's sons, or their great uncle's sons. Eventually, you'll come to an heir somewhere, and nephews. But it also goes back if you don't have any in that generation or the previous, you go back a generation. So like the uncles and their sons, and then the great uncles and their descendants. So eventually, you'll come to one. The only case our sages say is a convert. So if a person converts to Judaism, and let's say they don't get married, or their wife precedes them in death, and they don't have any children. So in that case, it's considered as if they don't have any heirs. And so there the Torah says, yeah.
Somebody converts.
Yeah.
They have to get someone who is Jewish to sign the conversion.
Right.
Paper saying that they are now considered their parent.
I'm not familiar with that, but it's not halachically their parents, and that meaning I don't know what that does. I'll be honest. Haven't been involved too much in conversions, but there's no halachic basis to actually make someone a parent. Meaning that you might have people who are taking responsibility and being and taking on the burden of really ensuring that they're welcome and that they're familiar with what they need to be familiar with, and to guide them through Jewish life. But they don't actually halachically become their parents in the sense that they wouldn't inherit them. So, but once again, I haven't been involved much in that area. So, but the Torah says if man has no kinsman to whom the debt can be returned, the return debt is for Hashem, for the Kohen, and that the debt actually, if he doesn't have anyone to inherit it, so the thief, the robber, has to pay his restitution, and he would pay to the Kohanim, since the person he stole from has no heirs. Okay, and this is aside from the Ram of Atonement, like we mentioned, that he would have to bring an offering as well. And this section concludes in verse 9, and every portion from any of the holies that the children of Israel bring to the Kohen shall be his. A man's holies shall be his, and what a man gives to the Kohen shall be his. So there are really two approaches I saw on what this means, and especially this repetition. And Rashi, I think, understands this, that a person might think, let's say, that let's say a person the Torah requires a person to give truma. He has to give a certain portion of his crops to Kohen. He has to give ma'aser. He has to give a certain tithes to Levi. And one may think that therefore a Kohen could come in, say, you owe these tithes, or a Levi could come in, you owe these tithes, and just collect it from him. And that's what the Torah is saying, that the holy stuff that he has is his. And that means that he has the right of distribution to decide where it goes. So if a Kohen comes and says, you owe these tithes, I'm taking it, he could say, you can't take it, I want to give it to that Kohen. And you have that right of the right of deciding who to distribute to. So in a sense, it belongs to us in that sense. And then it continues, and every portion from any of the holies of the children of Israel will bring to the Kohen shall be his. And then a man's holies shall be his, and what a man gives to the Kohen shall be his. So a man's holies shall be his. Or sages say, what if a person doesn't give the tithes that he's required to? So in the end, it'll turn out he'll have his crops won't be successful, and he'll just end up with 1/10 of what he was expecting. So the amount that he should be giving to the tithe will be all he'll end up with at the end, that he won't be successful. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. Okay, so now let's continue. Now we have the section of a sota, a wayward wife, and those who go to Daf Yomi should be very familiar with this. So in verse 11 of page 753, Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, any man whose wife shall go astray and commit treachery against him, and a man could have lain with her carnally, but it was hidden from the eyes of her husband, and she became secluded and could have been defiled, but there was no witness against her, and she had not been forced. And a spirit of jealousy had passed over him, and he had warned his wife, and she had become defiled, or a spirit of jealousy had passed over him, and he had warned his wife, and she had not become defiled. Okay, so what's the case here? So the case is that a man is suspicious of his wife becoming unfaithful with a specific person, and he warns his wife in front of witnesses, do not seclude yourself with that individual. That he warns her that I'm seeing you acting in a way that is not appropriate with that person. So I'm warning you, don't be alone with that person. And you find there are witnesses that she in fact, following that warning, did seclude herself. So did seclude herself with that person. And yeah. So now he could take her to the Kohen, and they go through this process. And our sages say that what this process is all about is making peace between a husband and a wife. Because if not for this process, which we'll see is completely miraculous, that it's the only, I think the Ramban says it's the only place in the Torah that we find that we actually have a mitzvah to rely on miracles. That we have no mitzvah in the Torah that like thou shalt make an incantation and fire will come down from heaven. Nowhere do we in the Torah do we have those those mitzvahs, but here we do. It's a mitzvah that you give her this solution, and it'll test her. And if she's guilty, so her stomach will distend, whatever. And if she's innocent, so nothing will happen. And this is completely outside the realm of nature. And this is all in order to make peace between a husband and wife, because if not for this, there will be a constant suspicion from the husband's side, and he might actually be forced to divorce her and to end the marriage, because it's prohibited. There's a prohibition in the Torah for to remain married to a woman, or for the woman to remain married after she had committed adultery against him. That she's prohibited to her husband and to the adulterer. So they wouldn't be able to remain married, and this test of the sota water, this test of the sota, is what allows them to remain married, and allows him also to remove his suspicion against her that an adultery had taken place. So once again, so what's happening here is he's suspicious of his wife with this person, and he warns her in front of witnesses, do not be alone with this person, do not seclude yourself with this person, and she did. She secluded herself with this person. He has witnesses to that effect, but the witnesses did not see what happened. They didn't actually see an act of adultery. They just saw that they went alone somewhere together. Okay.
So does the seclusion be usher from the Torah if there was no warning, or it's just Rabbanan?
Okay, so there's seclusion, yichud. Seclusion would be usher in the Torah if a union between the two people would be prohibited. So if let's say they're an erva. But in this case, for a married woman to be secluded with another man, that would be prohibited by Torah law. I think we learned that, I think, from like Sikravu, don't come close to revealing the erva. I think that's where we derive that from. But there's a rabbinic prohibition, even if they're not to be secluded, even if they're not prohibited to each other by Torah law, if they're just unmarried. So there's the biblical prohibition would be in a case where there's in a case where these people would be prohibited to get married in the first place. One of them might be if she's married already, and there's a rabbinic prohibition if they're not if there's no other prohibition other than them not being married to each other. Is that clear? Okay. Okay. So, but in this case, he warned her, and there's testimony that she did in fact seclude herself with him. And in verse 15, the man shall bring his wife to the Kohen on page 755. He shall bring her offering for her, a 10th ephah of barley flour. He shall not pour oil over it, and shall not put frankincense upon it. For it is a meal offering of jealousies, a meal offering of remembrance, a reminder of iniquity. Usually offerings are wheat outside of the Omer offering. This offering is barley, which is considered animal food. That people ate wheat bread. That barley bread was considered lower. And we're saying that she's being accused of acting like an animal, of not being concerned with remaining with her mate, with her spouse. And then there's the confession in verse 16. The Kohen shall bring her near, have her stand before Hashem. The Kohen shall take sacred water in an earthenware vessel. The Kohen shall take from the earth that is on the floor of the tabernacle and put it in the water. The Kohen shall have the woman stand before Hashem, uncover the woman's head, and upon her palms he shall put the meal offering of remembrance. It is a meal offering of jealousies. And the hand of the Kohen shall be the bitter waters that cause curse. Page 757. The Kohen shall adjure her and say to the woman, if a man had not lain with you, and you have not strayed in the defilement with someone other than your husband, if you didn't commit adultery, then be proven innocent by these bitter waters that cause curse. But if you have strayed with someone other than your husband, and if you have become defiled, and a man other than your husband has lain with you, then the Kohen shall adjure the woman with a curse, and the Kohen shall say to them, may Hashem render you as a curse and an oath amid your people, that people will say about a person like, remember what happened to her? Like that should happen to that person. She would be like an example of bad things happening. And when Hashem causes your thigh to collapse and your stomach to distend, these waters that cause curse shall enter your innards, cause stomach to distend, thigh to collapse. The woman shall respond, Amen, Amen. And they go through all of this, that she holds this thing and they uncover her hair. And this is all in order to cause her to admit to having committed the adultery. If she does admit to committing the adultery, then they would not give her the waters. Her husband would divorce her. She would not be entitled to ksuba. But other than that, she'd basically be free to live her life. But once again, and that's because there's no witnesses who actually saw it, so they can't actually accuse her in court. So if she would admit to having committed the adultery, so that would be the end of it. She would get divorced, and she would be prohibited from remarrying her husband. She would be prohibited from marrying the person that she's admitted to committing adultery to, but that's the end of it.
Would she be allowed to marry somebody else?
Yes. Yeah.
But if she did drink with
Yes.
the person that she played around with, he would die as she died.
Yes, that's correct, and we'll get there as when we see when it happens. So, and as we'll see, well, let's continue to what they did. In verse 23, the Kohen shall inscribe these curses on a scroll and erase it into the bitter waters. When he shall cause the woman to drink the bitter waters that cause curse, then the waters that cause the curse shall come into her for bitterness. and he takes the meal offering, wave it before Hashem, bring it near the altar, and he'd go through the process, and then he has the woman drink the water. And in verse 27, he shall cause her to drink the water, and it shall be that if she had become defiled, if she did commit adultery, and had committed treachery against her husband, the waters that cause curse shall come into her for bitterness, and her stomach shall be distended, and her thighs shall collapse, and the woman shall become a curse amid her people. But if the woman had not become defiled, she is pure, and then she shall be proven innocent, and she shall bear seed. That there's a special bracha that she has if she has been accused falsely, that she'll have children. But it says here in verse 23 that he inscribes these curses on a scroll and he erases it into the bitter waters. Hashem's name, the name of God, is in this section of the curses. And usually there's a prohibition against erasing the name of Hashem. But in this case, this is a special case that our sages say that Hashem says that it's better that my name be erased than there be conflict between a husband and a wife. And that the harmony within family life is so important that we'd even erase the name of Hashem in order to bring about harmony. And once again, assuming that she didn't commit adultery, so this test would be testimony to the husband that she's been faithful, and they could resume a more harmonious life rather than having this distrust hanging over the relationship forever. Okay. And on page 759, verse 29, this is the law of the jealousies. When a woman shall go astray with someone other than her husband, become defiled, or if a man over whom passes a spirit of jealousy, and he warns his wife and causes his wife to stand before Hashem, then the Kohen shall carry out for her this entire law. The man will be innocent of iniquity, but the woman shall bear her iniquity. So I say two things. Like Fred mentioned, that not only will this happen to her, but it will also happen to the adulterer. When she drinks the water, the adulterer will also have identical symptoms to her. Once again, this is miraculous, obviously. It's not a natural occurrence. And but if the husband was unfaithful to his wife, so in that case, he wouldn't merit this miracle, and it would not be a success. It wouldn't test her if the husband wasn't faithful himself. So if he had been involved in illicit relationships, so then even if she had committed adultery, so this test would not show that. That's another thing our sages say. And I think the Ramban comments that there was a point where there were many that unfortunately adultery became more common amongst our brethren, and they stopped doing this test because they felt we didn't deserve it. This is a miracle. We can't rely on miracles when we're not safeguarding our familial holiness. Okay,
yeah. Let's say from the get-go, the husband is guilty of adultery.
Yeah.
His wife is not. I mean,
yes.
She's faithful to him. So what happens to him?
So in that case, it would depend, first of all. So if she's not and he is, so then it would, how do I say this? It depends what happens with the woman that he was involved with. If they do the Sota test, they do the Sota test with her, and he dies. If not, so then there's two questions. There's either if they're witnesses to his adultery, so then they would testify in court, and he would be punished by the court. And if they're not witnesses to his adultery, so then it's in Hashem's hands. That Hashem doesn't need our help, basically, and that's a very important principle of justice. That we have this mitzvah for our courts to render justice in this world, but that doesn't mean that that's what justice is limited to. And if we don't, if for whatever reason we're not able to carry it out, whether if a person does it, there are no witnesses. There are no witnesses, so the court can't do anything. But it's in the hands of Hashem, and Hashem is capable, very capable, without our help, of dispensing justice. Yeah.
Could the wife divorce him? And
so it's a very good question.
if he's unfaithful and she's
yes.
not, and there's never any indication that she ever was.
Yeah.
Forget the other one.
Right.
that he was with, can his wife divorce him with without any, no fault? I
Right.
mean, could she-
So a divorce can only be given by the husband to the wife. But there are certain cases where the court will force the husband to give that divorce.
Okay.
And that might be one of them. So if the court decides that the husband has to divorce his wife and he refuses, so they'll use some very
But those guys
persuasive,
from Queens that got arrested.
yeah, for that, right. They're
Right.
yeah. So they'd use some very persuasive techniques in convincing him to agreeing to divorce. He has to agree to do it, but he could be compelled by the court to agree to do it. But once again, that has to be done right, and that's really where the issue is. Okay.
Sometimes trying to get signed
Yeah.
by the ex-husband. I know two cases where
Yeah.
it took a group of rabbis, two different guys, signed it.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I know it's.
Yeah, and it's one of these cases where right, it's one of these cases where sometimes that's the meaning when they're negotiating the divorce settlement, what they're doing with the assets, with everything, that's a leverage that the husband has over the wife. And he's not required to give, she has leverage, he's not required to give up that leverage. But once the court decides that he should be giving the get, that's when meaning you need that decision. Meaning there are times when you negotiate first before you give up all your leverage. But once the court says, okay, that's over, negotiations are over, this is the decision, this is what you're doing. If he still refuses to give the get, that's where there's a problem. I know somebody who he said his father-in-law was basically a psychopath. This is before he married his wife. He ended up in jail. And but I'm not from here. But and this is a charusa I had in Lakewood, and he said that his mother-in-law was got a get. He said that a group of people got together and offered the father-in-law a tremendous amount of money to convince him to give the get. And that's considered on the level of pidyon shvuyin, on the mitzvah of redeeming a captive. That we have a mitzvah that if someone's, let's say, taken into captivity, into our slavery, so we have a mitzvah to redeem them, to pay off the captors, to set them free. And this is, this is basically the same thing, that she's held hostage by this husband, and the court says that it's time, you have to divorce her, that you're done with you're done with whatever you're allowed to do with withholding the get. And she refused. We do everything we can, whether like we said, whether it's the physical persuasion has to be done by approved by the greatest Torah scholars, and they might not even approve it nowadays. But it has to be done right. But sometimes they'll pay him off. Okay, so now it's the next is the Nazarite. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, say to them, a man or a woman who shall dissociate himself by taking a Nazarite vow of abstinence for the sake of Hashem from new or aged wine, he shall abstain. He's not allowed to have any wines or grape products. Or anything when grapes have been steeped, he shall not drink fresh and dried grapes. He shall not eat anything made from wines and grapes. Even the pips or the skin he shall not eat. That's the pips or the seeds. In verse 5, all the days of the Nazarite vow, a razor shall not pass over his head. He's not allowed to get a haircut or shave. The growth of his hair on his head shall grow. And he shall not come near, in verse 6, he shall not come near a dead person, to his father, to his mother, to his brother or sister. He shall not contaminate himself to them upon their death. He can't even go to a mother or father's funeral, be involved in their burial. Similar to Kohen Gadol. So, our sages say, and it continues in verse 7, for the crown of his God is upon his head. All the days of his abstinence, he is holy to Hashem. So, and it says all the days of his abstinence because this was usually not a permanent thing, that it would be a vow that a person took for a certain length of time. Our sages say that if he doesn't give a length of time, the assumed length of time is 30 days. That's the normal Nazarite vow would be for 30 days.
I mean, you couldn't just do this for like 3 or 4 days.
I don't know.
I mean, it would have to be like some,
Right. You would think like 3 or 4 days it would be easy, but I don't think that 30 days is the minimum. I could be wrong. I haven't learned the halachas.
Yeah, I recall from the Daf Yomi that
Yeah.
30 is the minimum.
30 is the minimum? Yeah, like I say, it could be wrong. I'll take
yeah, but it wouldn't make
very
sense.
much,
I'm
right.
gonna do this for like 4 days.
Right, but I do remember that they say stam is that means that if the duration is not stated, it's assumed to be 30 days.
Do anybody, they might do that.
The problem with doing it now is that, well, as we'll see, there's a process for leaving the Nazarite state. You'd have to, and which would be involve bringing an offering, which we can't do. So if someone does it now, they're stuck forever.
Ah, okay.
And I think there has been one in the not so distant past. And
In cases, women have said their husbands heard about it and
that's another thing is that right.
leave them.
Right. That's another thing is that this is a vow. This has the status of a vow, and vows can be nullified in certain cases. That if a person regrets the vow and the court will, and you have a sitting court that decides that there are circumstances that if he would have known about it, he wouldn't have made the vow, they could annul it. And that would be, I guess, that would be how one could get out of a Nazarite vow. But otherwise, they can't complete the Nazarite in the Nazarite duration and then leave it because we can't bring an offering. So as we said here, that they no grape products, no wine or any other grape products, no haircuts or shaving, and no coming in contact with the dead. And my sages say, why is this put immediately after the section of the wife who's suspected of being adulterous? And our sages say that because anybody who sees a woman in a sota, this suspected woman in her disgrace, should make himself a nazir. That's a proper response to that. What does that mean? That what causes a adultery? Usually, very rarely are people, or as far as I would assume, very rarely are people proud of cheating in a relationship. Usually it's something that it's a decision, a spur of the moment decision, or a decision that they deeply regret afterwards. At least that's what they say, that they deeply regret it afterwards. And so what causes that? What causes a person? It's caused by not thinking clearly. And being one of the very common steps leading towards that is drinking, is being inebriated. Yeah, exactly. And it causes loosened, thank you, that's a perfect phrase. It causes loosened inhibitions, which leads towards in this direction. So if a person sees a sota, so in two things. First of all, even though he's seeing her in her disgrace, but at the same time, it becomes something he gets more used to. Meaning he's seen someone who did that, so the concept isn't so foreign to him anymore. It's not something that can happen, because look, I saw it happen. And when you see something happen, a person should run away in the opposite direction and make sure that it doesn't happen to them. And therefore, he says, I don't want to be in such a state of loosened inhibitions. So he should swear off the wine, and also you're growing the hair long and the beard long. It's not beautifying himself. Okay. So it's holy to Hashem. And then on page 761, it has the case, what if a person, like he's not supposed to come in contact with the dead? What if he's in he's in a room and someone dies in the room? He's in contact with the dead because being under the same roof he has to vacate quickly, but then it says he in verse 9 on page 761, and contaminates his Nazarite head. He shall shave his head on the day he becomes purified on the 7th day, meaning he goes through the purification process for someone who's come in contact with the dead, which is 7 days day 3 and day 7, I think, or 6. I don't remember, with the red cow, the ashes of the red cow. And the 7th day, he shall shave it. On the 8th day, he shall bring 2 turtle doves. He brings an offering, and then he brings a sheep as a guilt offering, and then he has to start over. And whatever duration he had for the Nazarite starts again from day 1. So if it got interrupted at any time, he starts over. And now in verse 13, this shall be the law of the Nazarite, and the day of his abstinence is completed. What if he did successfully complete his time as a Nazarite? Shall bring himself to the entrance of the tent of meeting, bring his offering to Hashem, 1 unblemished sheep in its first year as an elevation offering, 1 unblemished ewe in its first year as a sin offering, 1 unblemished ram as a peace offering. So I say, what's this sin offering for? What sin did he commit? That in this case, we're not talking about someone who messed up. He completed his time as a Nazarite. So what's this sin offering about? So there's one opinion is that he brings a sin offering for having deprived himself of the pleasures of this world. Meaning that Hashem put us in this world, and Hashem gave us everything in this world as tools in order to use in our service of Hashem. And wine does have its uses. Wine has its uses, and we can make kiddush on wine. We celebrate weddings with wine. We celebrate bris milah, or pretty much any religious great event. We celebrate with wine, and we could enjoy a yontif meal with wine. So everything Hashem puts in this world is an opportunity for spiritual growth and to be used as mitzvahs. And if a person bans that, he loses that opportunity. But not only that, he gives himself more opportunities to sin. Meaning that until he made this oath of being a Nazarite, so if he were to drink wine, a little bit of wine, nothing's wrong. Now, if he drinks wine, he violated an oath, which is a very severe sin. So he basically added a new Yetzer Hara to himself. It's like all the mitzvahs aren't enough for him. He has to have even more opportunity, more chances to mess up. So while on the one hand, it's very noble to cause, to guard yourself against falling into that trap, the ideal might even be, instead of swearing an oath, to have the strength of character to be able to just not have wine. Make that decision. I'm not having any wine without an oath. And some of our sages say that it's really only that case when he saw the sota, meaning he has reason to be concerned about himself, that it's the right thing, that he's considered holy by making the oath. But otherwise, in general, we try to stay away from oaths. It's not something we want to be involved in. The Ramban, though, takes an opposite approach. And the Ramban says that the sin offering is for the sin of leaving the Nazarite status, meaning when he's a Nazarite, he's holy. The Torah calls him holy. So when he leaves that state, he's basically saying, I'm done being holy. Now I don't want to be so holy anymore. And that itself is, on a certain level, that itself is a sin, and he has to bring an offering to atone for that. And okay, and she shaves all his hair off, and he cooks it, and he goes through this process. So now in verse 22 on page 767, we have the priestly blessings, Birkas Kohanim. And it states, Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, speak to Aaron and his sons saying, so shall you bless the children of Israel, saying to them, may Hashem bless you and safeguard you. May Hashem illuminate his countenance for you and be gracious to you. May Hashem lift his countenance to you and establish peace for you. This is the Birkas Kohanim that we say on Yantiv, and that some Sephardic Jews actually say every day. And in verse 27, let them place my name upon the children of Israel, and I shall bless them. So just a few things about the Birkas Kohanim. The Klayaka points out that it says in verse 23, so shall you bless the children of Israel, saying to them. What's the saying to them? So why is it not, so shall you bless the children of Israel? May Hashem bless you, etc. This is in verse 23, I'm sorry. So the Rashi says, saying to them means that a Kohen should say it in a loud, clear voice, without, with intent, not just rushing through it. But the Klayaka says that, quotes that our sages say that this is the source, that instead of just the Kohanim pronouncing it, that they follow the Chazan. That the Chazan says each word of the blessing, and the Kohanim repeat it after them. And saying to them means that the Chazan should say it to the Kohanim, and then the Kohanim say it to the community, to the congregation. Why is that? Why do they need they probably know it very well. Why do they need the Chazan to say it? So the Kliyakar explains that a blessing's always better when the person who's giving the blessing is blessed themselves. Compares it when you have, compares it to a cup, when you have a full cup, an overflowing cup, so then you could spread the wealth, spread the blessing in the cup to other people. But if the cup is empty, you have nothing to share. So first, when he says when the Chazan is saying the blessings, he's actually blessing the Kohanim. And he's giving that blessing to the Kohanim, so the Kohanim are full of blessing, and they could share that blessing with the community, with the congregation. And that's why it concludes, let me place my name upon the children of Israel, and I shall bless them. That how am I placing my name on the children of Israel? That I'm blessing them, I'm blessing the Kohanim. And through that, the Kohanim could place my name on the children of Israel. Okay, that's one thing. Another thing, I think it's the Kliyakar points out that he says that there are 60 letters in the blessing in Birkas Kohanim. I counted. There are 60 letters in Birkas Kohanim. And he said also this is getting into the complicated gematrias, but also each of the 3 verses of Birkas Kohanim starts with a yud. You see in verse 24, Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, may Hashem bless you. Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. Then Ya'er starts with a yud, and then Yisa also starts with a yud. So the 3 verses each start with a yud, and he says a yud itself. How would you spell the letter yud? It would be yud vav dalet. So he said yud, and has a numerical value of 10, and vav dalet added together also have a numerical value of 10, because vav is 6 and dalet is 4. Add that 6 and 4 equals 10. So you have 10, 10. And so each verse, in a sense, starts with 20, and you add the 3. So you have 3 yuds, that's 60. So you have 60 again. And he says that this is a reference to the what we say in Shir Hashirim, in the Songs of Songs, that it says that the King Shlomo had 60 mighty warriors surrounding his bed from the terrors of the night. And these mighty warriors are the 60 letters of the Birkas Kohanim, the blessings that the Kohanim give us that protect us throughout the night of exile, that we have we're protected by the blessings of the Kohanim. Okay, and about the blessings, if you look at the blessings, it says, may Hashem bless you and safeguard you.
There are 60.
Yeah, you just counted. Yes, there are 60 letters. I counted before the class just to make sure that I trust the Kliyakar, but sometimes they play around with some rules to make the numbers fit. No, but this is actually 60. So it says, may Hashem bless you and safeguard you. So with the blessing and the safeguard, so our sages say the blessing is material blessing. The safeguarding is safeguarding the material blessing, that you can give someone material blessing all you want, but if they can't keep it, so they'll get it and it'll run out. And that's a danger, they say. Like people win the lottery, so they get all this money, but they don't know how to protect it and how to spend it properly and invest it. And if somebody, let's say they find all kinds of friends and relatives they didn't know they had, and all kinds of muggers and criminals that they didn't know were around to take the money from them. So when Hashem gives us the blessing, not only does Hashem give us bounty, but Hashem helps us, Hashem protects it and allows us to keep it. Okay. And it concludes with Hashem will lift his countenance to you and establish peace for you, because ultimately, without peace, all blessings are really, I don't want to say useless, but are mostly meaningless. That if a person, they could have all kinds of wealth and all kinds of material blessings, But if they don't have, if there's a lack of peace in their family and in their life, or even lack of inner peace, so they don't feel blessed at all. The blessings don't affect them in a positive way. Okay, and the Parsha concludes in page 765, chapter 7, with the offerings of the tribal leaders that and it says in chapter 7, verse 1, it was on the day that Moshe finished erecting the tabernacle, he anointed it, sanctified it, etc. So in verse 2, the leaders of Israel, the heads of their father's household, brought offerings. They were the leaders of the tribes. They were the ones who stand at the countings, meaning all the leaders of each tribe except the tribe of Levi. So Reuven, Shimon, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zebulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Ephraim, Menashe, and Benjamin. So there are 12, but it excluded Levi. So they donated wagons for the carrying of the sacred, carrying of the tabernacle, and Moshe gave it to the families of the Levium to help bear the burdens. And on page 767, verse 10, then the leaders brought forward offerings for the dedication of the altar on the day it was anointed, and the leaders brought their offering before the altar. And Hashem said to Moshe, one leader each day shall bring their offering for the dedication of the altar, beginning with Yehuda. And if you look in verse 12, the first one was Nachshon, son of Aminadab of the tribe of Yehuda. His offering was 1 silver bowl, its weight 130 shekel, 1 silver basin of 70 shekel, and the sacred shekel, both of them filled with fine flour mixed with oil for meal offering, 1 gold ladle of 10 shekels filled with incense, 1 young bull, 1 ram, 1 sheep. And as an elevation, 1 he-goat, 1 peace offering, and for peace offering, 2 cattle, 5 rams, 5 he-goats, 5 sheep. In the first year, this is the offering of Nachshon, son of Aminadab. And it goes through all the tribes and their offerings. And if you look at them, they end up to be exactly the same. That the leader of each tribe brought the identical offering, but it speaks out each one individually instead of just saying they all brought the same thing on a separate day. So why does it need to list off each one? So our sages say one reason is that Hashem wants to give honor to those who fear him, that these were very righteous people, and in order to honor them for their dedication, so they're each listed separately instead of just included in one group. But our sages say additionally that they each came up with this idea individually. It wasn't that they had a meeting and decided together what they were going to bring, but they each decided separately, and they each had their own reasons for what they brought. They all ended up identical, miraculously, but each of them had a different reason that was specific to him and his tribe why this is what the donation that they gave. For each, the size, the weight, and the materials, and the animals, and what kind of offerings. And because of that, they're listed separately, because they each brought it as an individual with their own reasons, not as one group. Okay, and that goes on for a long time, which is the reason why Naso is the longest individual parsha in the Torah. And then it adds them up all together on page 773, verse 84. And the parsha concludes in verse 89 on page 773. When Moshe arrived at the tent of meeting to speak with him, he heard the voice speaking to him from atop the cover that was on the ark of the testimony, from between the 2 cherubim. He spoke to him. And the Torah is on page 1181. And I didn't look at it, but if I remember correctly, it is the Haftorah discussing Samson, which is an incredible story, and it's worth studying. Okay, shkoyach. Everybody have a great Shabbos.